the one country in the region that gives us hope, and add some remarks to what the Noble Lord Pollock has already said. And of course, I'm talking about Somaliland. And I think it is important that we remind peers and others who listen to this debate that just a slight bit of history, because in 1960, Somaliland emerged as an independent country from the British Empire after many years as British Somaliland. And after that, it very quickly took steps to merge with what was then the trust territory of Somaliland, historically the Italian Somaliland, to form a union. And there was originally huge optimism and hope of creating a country where all Somalis could come together and live together peacefully. Sadly, that didn't happen. Things got worse. Military dictatorships based in Mogadishu, and discrimination against those in northern Somalia, with the attacks on civilians, the mass killings, the genocide, Somali jets bombing parts of northern Somalia and destroying Hargeisa, almost destroying completely that city. But out of those decades of horror, Somaliland declared itself free of Somalia in a declaration of independence back in 1991. And now, for the last 33 years, that proud country has been asking for the world to recognise it. It's doing everything that we in the Western world and Western democracies continue to flag up as showing what a democratic, free country should be doing. It has regular, as been mentioned, free and fair elections, and in a couple of weeks we're going to see their 6th presidential election. And like those before, I hope, and I'm sure they will, be peaceful. It has an active civil society. It's made huge strides in the advancement of women's rights, even beginning to tackle what the Noble Lady Baroness Harman mentioned, the scourge in that area, female genital mutilation. And the current president is even considering banning FGM altogether. All sexual violence and rape acts go through the criminal justice system and are not, as elsewhere in the region, dealt with by community or customary law, which have been outlawed. And it has a strong and fair justice system and religious tolerance. Indeed, in this whole region, independent Somaliland is the only beacon for democracy and the rule of law, and we should be lauding what they have achieved. And yet, despite that progress, their achievements, and their loyalty to the United Kingdom, and let's not forget how many Somalis died, sacrificed during the Second World War when they joined us in fighting fascism. In spite of all of that, we always find reasons to procrastinate and not officially recognise it. And I find it interesting that when I had a question a couple of weeks ago as to the possibility of the UK recognising Somaliland, one or two peers were urging so much caution that it seemed they didn't even want to discuss Somaliland, and almost implied that those of us who raised it were being reckless. It was also very telling that in the response to the minister's response, the Noble Lord Howell of Guildford was able to point out that the same answer had been given to him to read out on the question of Somaliland being recognised when he was minister at least 10 years ago. So I think that should give us food for thought, because there obviously hasn't been much change in the Foreign Office briefings over those years. Now, I'm aware, and of course we all are, of the complexity, as been mentioned by other peers, of the region. And that does cause the Foreign Office officials and Foreign Office ministers to be careful, very careful in their diplomatic efforts. It doesn't, of course, stop other countries from looking after their own interests first. And we're seeing, of course, now the beginning of China getting very much involved in the Horn of Africa, and having said publicly that it's geographically strategic importance to them, it's got abundant resources and enormous potential, and they've now got a special envoy. I want to say something about aid, because aid that's been going direct, aid should be going, any aid that we're giving should be going directly to the people of Somaliland rather than via Somalia, where it is used as a political tool. And we remember that during the COVID pandemic, vaccines earmarked for Somaliland were deliberately delayed in Mogadishu, released only hours before they expired. And this did expose the politicisation of humanitarian aid. And state-directed aid is also typically routed through Somalia. And understandably, the Somaliland government has repeatedly declared it neither can nor will accept development or budgetary support filtered through Somalia's federal government. They view that as an affront to a country that is running itself freely and successfully. We should be rewarding good governance and using Somaliland as a beacon to show the rest of the region what can be achieved. Now, Human Rights Watch produced a brief for this debate which highlights all the terrible atrocities and obscenities and human rights abuses that are taking place in Ethiopia, Eritrea and Somalia. And just like the Noble Lord Pollock said earlier, the word Somaliland in the Human Rights Watch wasn't even mentioned. And that's, I mean, clearly they have not wanted to distinguish between Somalia and Somaliland. And I think that is very, very sad that the benefits of what's been happening there are not being put forward. And our government's position seems to be, as mentioned in the Lords recently, that it's up to Somaliland to negotiate with Somalia. The Minister said in the questions recently, it is absolutely an issue for Somalia to resolve. Well, I just think that is actually not feasible at all. And if we look at what's happening in Somalia, the idea that they will suddenly say, or even after a lot of negotiations say, Somaliland, you can be independent and we will recognise you. But I think the idea that we're setting a precedent, and I know that that's been mentioned by a noble lord, that we're setting a precedent if we recognise it. But surely the Somaliland situation is unique because they were independent. They recognised back in 1960. And there would probably be a backlash from Somalia. But I believe that recognition by us would be followed very quickly by other Western countries, including the United States, and that this would actually encourage those people in Somalia who really want to see changes. It would encourage them to engage in dialogue. Surely we should be supporting and encouraging democracy around the world. And recognition, to me, is not just a moral imperative, but it would give the United Kingdom a strategic advantage that aligns with our foreign policy goals. It would be the first step to promote peace, stability and democracy in the entire Horn of Africa, benefiting all their people. And I know that the Noble Lord Collins is looking at this very carefully, as was said in the short debate we had on Africa some time ago. And I would urge our new government to look at this again, to be brave, not to wait till somebody else goes. Let's be the first. Let's recognise what Somaliland has done and can do, and how that could play a real part in improving the terrible situation that we've got in that region.